Iran thought they held all the cards in the Strait of Hormuz. A large part of their military infrastructure may have been destroyed, but their fast boats in that strait still gave them control. But now, that's really gone. The United States sent something to Iran that can change the course of the war in just one night. And it's on its way to the Strait of Hormuz. And this is the nightmare that Iran did not expect. One thing they didn't expect is that the US might already be preparing to send troops inside Iran itself. On March 14, various media outlets, including the BBC, reported that the US is sending more warships towards Iran. This is nothing new because when naval forces are increased, it usually leads to more attacks on Iranian territory, as we've seen in recent weeks with the deployment of American aircraft carriers. But this situation is really different. The ships heading to Iran are led by the USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship accompanied by an elite U.S. Marine Expeditionary unit bound for the Middle East. This type of ship and unit is a clear signal that the U.S. may be preparing to send troops on the ground, and we'll explain later why that might or might not happen. According to the war zone itself, the group being sent left after receiving direct authorization from U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and the U.S. Central Command. The group currently heading to Iran is called the Amphibious Ready Group, or ARG, which includes a Marine Expeditionary Unit. Usually an ARG is composed of an assault ship, 2 transport docks, and a support vessel carrying no less than 2,200 Marines and possibly even more. According to the New York Times, approximately 2,500 Marines are currently heading to the Middle East, including the 34th Marine Expeditionary Unit. At present, the USS Tripoli and its accompanying ships are sailing from their base in Japan toward the Middle East, and it seems they have been preparing for whatever comes next for quite some time. On March 13, the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command shared newly released photos of a live-fire exercise conducted by the crew of the USS Tripoli. It was called a routine exercise, but the timing seems intentional, because just 2 days after that training, the news came out that they were heading to the Middle East. And this is where it becomes more dangerous for Iran, because it's possible that this isn't just one group, since, according to Ian Ellis himself, there are other amphibious ready groups and task forces of the U.S. in the Pacific that can be ordered at any time to go to Iran. Included here is Task Force Ashland, which is currently in Thailand, and the USS Arlington, an amphibious warship that was spotted on March 1st, repeatedly conducting loading operations while being guarded by armed boats. Could this be preparation for deployment to Iran? It's still uncertain, but these kinds of activities seem to simulate situations that could happen in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most dangerous and important choke points in the world. Remember that strait, the Strait of Hormuz, because we'll come back to it later. Aside from the task force and warship we mentioned, Ian Ellis said that there are 3 more amphibious ready groups: the USS Iwo Jima, USS Boxer, and USS Kearsarge, that are ready to join the USS Tripoli if needed. This means that what we're seeing now could just be the beginning of a massive deployment of Marines. And even though this isn't a full-scale deployment yet, it's clear that the presence of the USS Tripoli and its accompanying ships is already a message to Iran that the entire U.S. strategy in the war is about to change. But this won't happen right away. According to open-source intelligence shared by MT Anderson on X, the USS Tripoli is really moving very quickly towards the Middle East. This can be seen in the satellite image. The large waves left behind by the ship are an indication that it is moving at full speed. But even at that speed, it still needs to travel from its base at White Beach in Okinawa. This warship was spotted approaching the base channel on March 12th, and it could take another 1 or 2 weeks before it reaches the Middle East. But even so, the headline is clear. The U.S. is already sending Marines and the amphibious warship to the Middle East. And for Iran, this is one of the things they fear the most, especially when it comes to their control over the Strait of Hormuz. But before we break that down, it's important to first understand what a Marine Expeditionary Unit really is. According to the New York Times itself, these units are called America's 911 Force. In other words, they're the ones called when there's an urgent and serious problem that needs to be solved. Marine Expeditionary Units have already been used in various operations, from anti-piracy missions to being the first force to set foot on the ground in major operations like what happened in the war in Afghanistan. These units are self-sustained and can respond quickly, complete with air, ground, and logistic support that is divided into 4 parts. First is the command element, which serves as the headquarters providing direction and support to the entire unit. Second is the ground combat element, which is the strongest in actual combat. Usually it includes a Marine infantry battalion, artillery, reconnaissance team, engineers, and amphibious vehicles used for assaulting enemy territory. Third is the aviation combat element. This is where air power comes in, with helicopters for transport, as well as fighter jets, attack helicopters, and air defense systems. And lastly, the logistic combat element. They are responsible for transportation, supply, equipment, maintenance, and medical support. So it's clear this isn't just about sending a few soldiers. This is an elite Marine unit, part of a larger amphibious assault force. A clear indication that the overall U.S. war posture is changing. The biggest impact will be in the Strait of Hormuz, where the main problems are currently happening. Iran continues to cause chaos in that strait, and it's not hard to understand why. Despite much of their mainland military infrastructure being destroyed, they still focus on the Strait of Hormuz. The fast boats of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, along with drones launched from Iran, continue to attack commercial vessels. This strait is one of the most important oil routes in the world. In fact, it's only 31 miles wide at the entrance and exit, making it very easy to monitor and control. And this is where around 20 million barrels of oil pass through every day as of 2025. Because of what Iran is doing, the flow of traffic in the area has almost come to a halt, except for a few ships that dare to cross. According to CBS News, the strait is being used as a choke point by targeting commercial shipping, which is causing oil prices to rise around the world. Right now, one of the main goals of the U.S. is to regain control of the Strait of Hormuz from the IRGC. And the situation is really no joke. According to the war zone itself, as of March 12, almost 16 commercial vessels have been attacked by the IRGC. 2 were spotted and 1 is missing. And in the first half of March, only 77 ships dared to pass through the strait. To help you better understand the situation, during the same period in 2025, as many as 1,220 ships passed through the Strait of Hormuz. But now, only about 1/16 of the normal traffic is getting through, and that's exactly Iran's leverage. And these attacks will continue as long as Iran and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps maintain control over the strait. The Marine Expeditionary Unit's arrival is crucial here. This shows that the war against Iran is entering a new phase, especially after the U.S. destroyed a large part of the country's military infrastructure through airstrikes. The arrival of this unit changes everything. And by the way, this is the kind of analysis that doesn't just give you the headline, but the whole picture. So if you want to always be ahead of the news, you know what to do. Now let's talk about what's called the posture shift. The arrival of the USS Tripoli, along with around 2,500 Marines, gives military commanders in the region a lot of options. This includes rescuing or evacuating crew members from damaged commercial ships. And if the U.S. decides to deploy troops on the ground, there could be limited operations against ports and bases where Iran's fast attack boats originate. Another important detail is that the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is currently heading to the Middle East, is part of America's Indo-Pacific forces. And that means the U.S. is reallocating their important assets, even if it's only temporary. A clear message? They are willing to weaken their presence in the Indo-Pacific to strengthen their forces against Iran. In other words, the U.S. will not back down. Instead, they are even increasing their strength in the Middle East. This deployment comes 2 weeks after the launch of Operation Epic Fury. According to Gulf News itself, this could give the Pentagon the capability to conduct raids on islands in the Persian Gulf, areas used by the IRGC for their strategy in the Strait of Hormuz. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit may target missile batteries, drone launch sites, and Iran's remaining capability to deploy sea mines. U.S. Central Command reports that 16 of Iran's mine-laying vessels have already been destroyed. As we said, the arrival of the Marine Expeditionary Unit gives the U.S. many options, and according to Pete Hegseth himself, there is already a plan, even if they haven't revealed it yet. In a press conference on March the 13th, he said that the only reason why passage through the Strait of Hormuz is blocked is because of Iran's seizure of ships. And if that stops, the route will be open. It sounds simple, but it has a deeper meaning. According to the war zone, Hegseth also said that the U.S. will not allow the Strait of Hormuz to remain contested. This means America has a plan. The only question is, what is it? And one of the possible answers is boots on the ground. As this possibility increases, there's another angle that should be considered. The versatility of the Marine Expeditionary Unit might be enough for the U.S. plan. For example, it can support America's air operations against Iran. And according to TWS itself, it is capable of deploying additional aircraft, including the F-35 Lightning to Sunsk. These can possibly be used for attacks on the Iranian mainland or for patrolling the airspace over the Strait of Hormuz. In this scenario, the fighter jets can be used to target Iran's fast boats and drones. And the USS Tripoli itself was designed for this kind of operation. In fact, it can be turned into what's called a lightning carrier, a mini aircraft carrier carrying F-35 jets. And possibly in this setup, it's like the US is adding another carrier force in the Strait of Hormuz that isn't affected by the other aircraft carriers already deployed in the region. In addition, the Marines can be used for search and rescue missions, protecting commercial ships, and in short, as a rapid response force that can respond to any threat in the strait. Even though this isn't a very large escort force, it's enough to provide protection and quick action. And of course, there's another possibility. The US could also use their marine and amphibious forces to attack the islands around the Persian Gulf. And if that happens, the situation will become even more intense. We've seen something like this before. When Karg Island was bombed, which the Wall Street Journal called Iran's most strategic economic asset, almost 70% of Iran's oil exports came from here. But what happened was more like a warning shot. The infrastructure was hit, but the US left the actual oil asset untouched. According to the US president himself, the US could still reverse this decision if Iran continues to refuse to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. So the question is sending Marines and amphibious ships to the Middle East a way to strengthen that threat? It's possible. Another important detail is that Iran owns more than 30 islands in the Persian Gulf, and how many of these are open to the public. As we mentioned earlier, an amphibious landing on these islands could give the US control over areas that could be the source of fast attack boats and drones. And once the US gains that control, Iran will gradually lose its leverage in the Strait of Hormuz. In other words, it's possible that the US is preparing for a scenario where they themselves will guard and control the strait by taking over the strategic islands right in front of the struggling Iranian regime. And while that's happening, the US continues its airstrikes on Iran, and the threat of even more intense attacks remains, especially against Karg Island. And now, let's move on to the most serious possibility. What was once considered distant, as stated by the US president in early March, boots on the ground. We remember back in 2001 during the war in Afghanistan, the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit was one of the first conventional US forces to set foot on the ground. This is not a minor detail because history shows that these kinds of units often serve as the spearhead, the first step before a wider ground invasion. Now a similar unit is heading to Iran, and this cannot be ignored. According to Bloomberg itself, the US president is still considering the possibility of sending ground troops. And because if he does this, American soldiers will be put directly in harm's way, and this could cause a strong reaction from his supporters within the US. But even so, the possibility is really increasing. And if that happens, the US will have a clear target. The first is Karg Isle and other strategic islands because of their importance to Iran's oil export and military operations. Second, according to Bloomberg, the US may target the large inventory of enriched uranium, which is a very sensitive and critical asset. At this point, it's clear that the situation is not just a simple tension. It is gradually moving toward a broader and more dangerous stage of war. And the next move of the US may determine whether this will remain a controlled conflict or result in a full-scale escalation. And it's not just the US taking action. Israel also launched attacks under Operation Midnight Hammer in June. There's also evidence that the US used the B-2 Spirit to launch a massive ordnance penetrator against Iran's underground facilities under Operation Epic Fury. No matter how powerful airstrikes are, they have limitations. Because in order to fully control and prevent the use of these underground facilities, especially to avoid what's called a dirty bomb scenario, ground presence is needed, soldiers are needed. But there's another possibility, and according to Bloomberg itself, the US might cooperate with the Central Command Intelligence Agency and Mossad to send a small team inside Iran. And the goal is to connect with the political opposition and form a true resistance movement against the current regime. It may sound unusual, but if you think about it, this is exactly how the US sees the possible regime change in Iran. After the first wave of attacks on February 28, the US president himself told the citizens of Iran, "When we're done, you will take over your government." Although he was a bit hesitant about that statement later on, because it's not easy for an ordinary citizen to fight back, especially now when members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps are firing at protesters. The direction remains clear. The US wants Iran to have a new government, and they are ready to support an TI regime movement. Now the question is, will this be the role of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit? It's possible, but it's extremely risky. The CIA and Mossad need a solid connection inside Iran, and they also need to make sure that these people can form an organized force that will support the U.S. If that happens, the U.S. should do the following. Control strategic locations like Karg Island, provide training and weapons to the resistance movement, and support the overthrow of the current regime from within. And remember, Iran's military power has already been greatly damaged by previous attacks. If it is further strengthened with organization, funding, and weapons, the resistance movement could be in its strongest position since the Iranian Revolution. And if the U.S. Marines and Special Forces join in, the balance of power could completely change. It may sound like a movie, but if this happens, Iran will lose its leverage in the Strait of Hormuz, and the regime itself could be the next to fall. And while all of this is happening, there's one person quietly observing, and that's none other than the president of Russia. This isn't his plan, because Russia uses Iran to strengthen its influence in the Middle East. But if Iran falls, this will have a huge effect on Putin. And that's the bigger question right now. If Iran falls, what effect will this have on the whole world?